Hello, social studies teacher friends. This video is to show you the hands-on activities that I use to help students learn about George Washington's 16-sided treading barn. I first want to give you a little of the background on why Washington created this amazing barn. Early on in his farming career, Washington was a tobacco farmer. Tobacco was his main cash crop. Pretty soon, though, he became disillusioned with tobacco. Tobacco depleted the soil quickly, and it left him in debt to British merchants. Around the 1760s, Washington started to transition into grain crops. He wanted colonial America to become the granary to the world. He thought that the colonies could gain economic success by improving their farming techniques for corn, wheat, barley, and rye. As a wheat farmer, though, Washington faced the same challenge that wheat farmers had had for centuries: how to easily, in a clean way, and quickly separate the wheat grain from the wheat stalk or the wheat head. Treading, or having animals walk over the wheat, namely horses, provided a good impact, the impact of their hooves. It gave an impact to help the grain separate from the straw or from the wheat head. The problem was that treading, when it was done outdoors, it could cause your wheat crop to get wet if a fast-moving rainstorm came through. Once your wheat grains are separated from the wheat head, if they get wet, they're ruined. Also, treading outdoors could be dirty. There could be dirt and dust that got into the wheat crop, and it was difficult to clean. So Washington created this 16-sided treading barn, and I want you to notice that it has two levels. We're going to talk about what happened on each of the levels, but this is what his 16-sided treading barn looked like. This is a recreation of the barn. This is a cardstock replica of the barn, and I recommend that you make it with your students if you can. It's really hard for kids, especially fifth graders, to imagine what does a 16-sided building look like. So if you just quickly make this replica with them, it's easier for them to notice that the more sides you start adding to a building, the more it starts to look like a circle or at least an oval. George Washington designed this barn so that his horses would be able to trot around the barn. And it's going to be really difficult to trot in a rectangular or a square barn. So the more sides he added, the more round-ish the barn became, and his horses were able to trot around the barn easier. So here's what the top level of this barn looked like. Notice there are slats in the floor. So what they would do is they would lay the wheat crop all around the top level of the 16-sided barn. They would bring the horses in. The horses would trot around the top level. The impact of their hooves would knock the wheat grain out of the stalks, and the wheat grains would fall through the slats in the floor to the clean granary floor below. So this process allowed Washington's workers to quickly gather up the clean grain from the bottom level, and most of the wheat stalks and the straw and the waste and the pieces from the wheat would stay on the top level, and mostly just clean grain would fall to the floor below. They would gather up that clean grain and they would take it to the grist mill to process it into flour. So I want you to think about how genius this barn was. Washington was able to move the wheat crop inside to get it out of the rain. any possible rain that would come. He was able to get the wheat inside, keep it dry, and then he was also able to keep most of the waste and pieces on the top level so that the grain below was clean. And a lot of kids will ask, well, when he took the horses into the treading barn, didn't they go to the restroom on the wheat? Wouldn't that make the wheat dirty? And this is a very good question. I asked the people at Mount Vernon about this very question because I thought, well, wouldn't it defeat the purpose if the horses just went to the bathroom on the wheat grain? And they said that if the horses are moving, they are quite unlikely to use the restroom. If horses are standing still, they will use the restroom then. But when the workers would bring the horses into the treading barn, they did not stop for a second. They kept them moving the entire time they were in the treading barn. And so it was quite unlikely that they would use the restroom. And even if they did, number one would fall through the slats, but they would be able to see where that happened, and they would just take that part of the clean grain that fell that had urine on it, and they would just take it out of the barn and dispose of it. If it was a number two, it would mostly stay on the top slats, and they'd be able to go and get rid of that and dispose of it quickly. Sorry to be gross, but kids will ask this, and they're really interested in anything gross. So definitely share with them if they ask. Okay, so the red arrow shows a wheat head, and this is where the wheat grains are. So the wheat head shown at the red arrow was what produced the wheat grains shown by the blue arrow. So the blue arrow, you can see what the wheat grains looked like. And then the purple arrow, that shows what the wheat grains looked like when they were crushed and milled into flour. So in this next part of the video, you're going to see how I do a hands-on simulation with students to help them understand the top part of the 16-sided treading barn and how the horses would walk over and provide impact on the wheat to get the wheat grains to fall below. I hope you enjoy this next part of the video. Hello, social studies teacher friends. This is my quick simulation that I do with students for George Washington's 16-sided treading barn. Let's look at the materials first. And I will say all of these are items that I picked up at Dollar Tree, Target, and Hobby Lobby. So definitely obtainable items if you would like to do this simulation with your students. First thing is a tray. It's about a medium-sized tray. And I have a top tray. Notice it's got these openings here. And it has a lip on it. So it fits directly inside of my bottom tray, and it has to be sturdy. It has to stay and fit nicely on the edge because this top tray represents the top level where the horses would walk and the wheat grain would fall through the slats in the floor. And my bottom represents the very bottom floor of the 16-sided treading barn where the wheat grains would fall to the floor. So it has to fit on there well. I did about 150 small beads from Hobby Lobby. They are in the multi-kits. And what I want you to notice and what I want you to look for if you go buy these materials is that the bead will fit in the slat. See, it's sitting right there, but I have to put some pressure on it for it to fall through, and there it fell through. So that's what you're looking for when you look for the pieces that fit together, okay? All right. Then I have about 40 straws, and these straws represent the stalks of wheat. And then I have about half of a microfiber dusting brush. And these are very soft microfibers, and you would just take them and just spread them around your wheat stalks. These represent the straw, the extra bristles of wheat that would come off during the process of the horses walking or treading on the wheat. So you just spread them around. And then finally, this bead has about 150, this container has about 150 beads. So I just take the beads and I just spread them around on top of my microfibers. And again, they don't fall through immediately. You have to put some pressure on them. So here is where it gets fun. The kids, they're not going to use fingertips. They're going to use their knuckles, and they're going to walk through the wheat just like a horse. And over time, these beads, it'll take a few minutes. It'll take a little bit of effort, but eventually those beads are all going to fall through. And this simulates my horse walking through the wheat. As the horses were walking through the wheat, they were breaking open the plant and they were making the wheat grains fall out, and then the wheat grains would fall through the slats on the floor of the 16-sided treading barn. So the treading barn really was a genius invention by Washington. He wanted to keep his wheat crop as clean as possible, and also to get the most wheat grains out of his wheat plants. So most of those beads are down there. Now let's look and see what's on this bottom level. See, we've got most of our beads, very little, notice very little of our straw, which is represented by our microfiber, very little of it fell through. That's how Washington was able to keep his wheat crop so clean. All of the waste and the wheat stalks and everything stayed above. Most of the beads fell through, the beads being the wheat grains, and the waste stayed on the top level. I hope that you are able to do this simulation with your students. I can see putting it in a center, or just allowing, one or two groups of students to let their horse knuckles walk over the wheat and get those beads knocked down into the bottom level.